Hey Lance, how are ya?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good, I'm good.
Good,
How's your day
good.
been so far? Busy?
Busy, hectic morning, clients all morning. Then I managed to cram in some training and now paperwork for the afternoon.
Paperwork, Fridays, always paperwork on Fridays.
Always, always.
All right, we're going to launch into this because we do only have
Yeah,
20 minutes. So to get through all five, we want to give as much detail as we can. So we're going to get straight into it. And obviously the reason we're here is for the Ultimate Transformation Blueprint, which we're trying to put together a really good tool. One to help trainers transform the bodies of their clients, but also getting them to ask the right questions as well,
yeah,
and stimulate the right education pathway. So
yeah,
your topic, the topic you cover, and obviously what you cover in the mastery program as well, is
yeah,
hormone and food habits, or hormones and food habits,
yeah.
um, which they do connect, obviously, and they are quite different, but they also do have a big connection as well.
There's a
Um,
lot of
so
crossover.
yeah, cool. So do you want to just give us a brief overview of how, say, hormones and food habits both affect, say, a body transformation and physique
Yeah.
change?
Yeah. So we'll start off. Let's talk a little bit about food habits first, because that's something that everyone already understands a little bit about.
Yeah.
So it'll be a little bit easier to understand on a Skype call. The hormones, we'll talk a little bit about them, but they're a bit harder to get across in a 5-minute stint.
Yeah. Right.
We'll elaborate more on that in the seminars and in the groups. But basically, with people's relationship with food, we undervalue how much of an attachment people have to behaviours that they've had for 20 or 30 years before they've come across you. So we expect that when people come and see us as a trainer, they already know what they want to achieve and they already know that they're willing to put in anything to achieve it. What they don't realize and what we don't realize initially is all the things that have developed over the years, habits, conditioning, so on and so forth, that might inhibit them from making the right decisions all the time. And what's really interesting about mindset is mindset's not easy to change, as I'm sure you've had with a lot of your clients.
Yeah.
And it's something where to change someone's mindset, you have to appeal to what they value, not to what you value. And that's a big issue that I see with a lot of personal trainers these days is I'll get clients that are coming in to see me after they've seen a personal trainer, and the personal trainer has tried to lead them down their path. And the problem is that path is not the path that's going to work for them long term. So they end up coming to see me and sitting down and having a discussion about their relationship with food back when they were kids, the things that they would indulge in when they were feeling sad or feeling mad or when they were sick and so on and so forth. And believe it or not, those habits that they had when they were 10 years old are still in the back of their head when they fall off their plans. So these mistakes that they're making or when they deviate or their adherence isn't on point are really ingrained in them from the early days. So what we try and do is we try and develop new pathways. So instead of saying naughty, naughty you, don't do it again, which doesn't get them anywhere, we try and add value to the choices that they're making by showing them what benefits it's going to have for them that they can relate to and that they want to pursue. So not everyone wants to step on stage and be a competitor, and it's feeling more and more like that's the world we live in these days, that the only point that we train, the only point of training and eating clean is to get us to that extreme side of things. And
I think
that's
it's a
not
really
everyone's.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, right? Like, even
Yeah,
if, like, and kind of going back to what you said, where, you got people that aren't wanting to compete, yet we're treating them like they do, and we're holding them to these standards like they should be, or this
yeah,
is the only way to get lean, or this is the only way to do, to get to their goal, where it's, they have to live this kind of certain life that most bodybuilders do, but except the goal is totally different, right? Like, you get someone
exactly
who does
right.
want to get a bit healthier, get a little
Yeah.
bit lean, do all of these things, yet we're telling them that they have to make all these sacrifices, or the same sacrifices that someone does when when they're stepping on stage, when really the goal is totally different.
Absolutely. And discussion is the only way to develop that. Because I'm sure you've noticed with your clients, the goal that they come in with versus the goals that they develop whilst they're with you are very different. So the goal that they come in with is usually based on some, what's the word I'm looking for? Something that they've been exposed to that they admire, right? So they might be flicking through social media and they see this person with this physique that they'd love to have. And we as trainers, nutritionists, coaches, so on and so forth, we have probably a better idea about what their potential is to achieve. And I'm sure you've seen this. People will come in and show you a photo of somebody who's 5'9", trim, lean, and has been their entire life. And the person who's bringing you that photo is 5'4", has a stocky build naturally, so on and so forth, and wants to achieve what they're showing you. And it's hard as a trainer or as a coach to help encourage that client to achieve something more realistic while still telling them that they're able to achieve anything they set their mind to. And this is where I think trainers, or some trainers, get lost in translation. Either they're too eager to provide what the client's asking for and don't give them a reality check about it, or they have their own intention, they have their own idea of what the client should look like and don't really inform the client that that's what they're going to pursue.
Yeah, I'm doing my own module in the transformation blueprint, and one of the things that I'm focusing on client experience, and I think one of the things that is changing the client's mindset from outcome driven to process driven.
Absolutely.
Change that, like, for them, where you're still having an outcome there, where you're not making it an unrealistic outcome. You're giving them an outcome that they can achieve, but then you're also showing the benefits of the process, right? Which is like, like building better habits. These types of things are the things where we actually feel progression rather than see it, if that makes sense.
And that's what helps them avoid the nasty cycles of food relationships as well. So if you say, this is where you are now and this is where you want to be and this is how to get there, that doesn't teach them anything. We need to say, all right, this is how you're going to feel when you're in a deficit. This is how you're going to feel when you haven't had the foods that you love for a couple of weeks, so on and so forth. And the reason why we're doing this is because in 4 weeks' time, when we've been able to drop your body fat and increase your lean mass, you're going to be really proud of what you've achieved. And then you're going to associate positively with the foods that you've been eating over that 4-week block, rather than having that restrictive mentality, feeling like you've been punished for making the right choice, essentially. And that's what a lot of my clients come in with. They feel like in the past, when they've seen nutritionists, naturopaths, coaches, whoever they go and see, they feel like what they've been presented with is a punishment rather than a way of life that's going to enable them to have a little bit of indulgence here and there, but also to be able to achieve their goals long term. And it's really interesting to see the fear attached to those choices, because they've been told that they need to eat brown rice, broccoli and chicken for breakfast, lunch and dinner to achieve that. So what we're doing as professionals a lot of the time, and what the people participating in this course will be learning about, is understanding that every step of the way the client's mentality is going to change. So at the start, it's going to be fear-driven, so they're going to have that, I'm not sure what we're going to do, will this work, da-da-da-da-da, and it's going to be a little bit resistant. And then as time goes on and they see their changes, the trust builds. And as the trust builds, all of a sudden the things that your trainer, coach, nutritionist, whoever you're seeing, is saying to you, you start to invest more and more in. Now, that's the point where I find I get really good results out of my clients. So you develop that relationship, and all of a sudden their food relationships start to reflect your food relationships. You start to understand that you can make healthy choices without feeling restricted. You can have carbohydrates. You can have all of these things that a lot of the time people feel like it's naughty to do. And you start to build this positive relationship with food. The biggest thing that we come up against, that I come up against time and time again, is negative feedback cycles. So people do really, really well for a while, then they make a mistake. And instead of acknowledging, accepting, and letting go of the mistake, they hold on to it and they try and compensate for it. And it's a really common behavior that every single one of us has done at some point. Every one of us has gone for a run because we ate a chocolate bar, or skipped a meal the next day because we think we overate the day before, so on and so forth. But what that does is it reiterates that negative feedback. It tells us that we're essentially not good enough, we failed, we made a mistake, and therefore we need to be punished. Whereas had we just recognized, accepted, and moved past that decision, we'd be done and dusted with it now. We busted 200 calories on our diet, who cares? Step forward and make positive change.
Another really cool thing is like something that Ben Pakulski talks about as well, is the term equanimity, right? Like taking emotion away from what actually happened, just analyze it, right? Oh yeah, I stuffed up, like not dwelling on it for 3 days and obviously, like you said, punishing yourself for it, but really going, okay, well, what led me to do that? I analyze it and then I just move on, and I just, I take the lesson out of it rather than punish myself.
As I say to my clients, guilt is the least most productive emotion. It doesn't stimulate you to do better. It just makes you feel terrible about the decision that you made. So there's nothing productive about it. Acceptance is powerful. When you can accept a decision and recognize that it's not going to ruin everything that you've put all of your effort into, you can then step past it and help to recognize the signs of when it's going to happen again. So we all have emotional connections to food. Any of the girls out there, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say that week leading up to your period. Honestly, emotion just takes over, and there you go. There's one of the connections between hormones and food choices. But it just takes over. Your metabolic rate spikes, your blood sugars go out of whack, your fluid levels are all over the place, and all you want to do is eat something that'll make you feel better. In your mind, you know it will make you feel better for 5 minutes, and then it's not going to have any benefit after that. But that choice feels like it's not yours to make at the time, which is very interesting. Yet, even though you make that choice and you know that it's hormonally driven and so on and so forth, 99.9% of the time after that, you feel you need to do something to compensate for it. And that's something we've got to get rid of. That didn't exist 50 years ago. We didn't have guilt with food 50 years ago because food was hard to come by. We were lucky if we had enough food to eat back then. So all of because all of these things are relatively new. If you look back at the history of diabetes and you look back at the history of syndrome X, track it back as far as you like, you're not going to get to your grandparents, right? They didn't have these problems because the issues were very different back then. Now we have issues with the fact that we have easy access to everything, don't we? If you don't have something in the cupboard, most people in Melbourne can just walk down the street and get something. Yes, it's unlikely to be a healthy alternative, but you can walk down the street and access food at any time, day or night. That didn't exist before. So we have these expectations now that we never had back then, and we have to start resolving those. We have to start looking at the underlying cause and why we make those decisions rather than punishing ourselves for those decisions once they're made. So you say this a lot, and I definitely respect it. Education is the key. If you understand why you're making these decisions, it's easier to recognize the thought process as it's coming up. So if we teach people how to recognize when they're feeling a little bit low and then all of a sudden let's say their cortisol levels go up, their blood sugar starts to spike, and they're looking for all of these things to satiate something that's not really there, that's when they make their bad decisions. If we can get them to recognize the emotion first, then they don't have to get to that stage with the food. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, it'll just take that out of it. Now, it's interesting because it used to be pardon me for saying this, but it used to be a real girl thing. Girls used to have these relationships with food. It wasn't really an issue for men, but it's becoming a massive thing for men these days as well. And it's interesting because men don't feel like they're allowed to say that they felt guilty for doing what they were doing. When women do it, it's like, oh, I felt terrible, so I starved myself for the next 2 days. When men do it, they say, oh, I had 6 burgers, this, that, and the next thing. And then the next day they go off and exercise the hell out of themselves because they think they need to make up for it, but they also don't think they're allowed to say to their mates, oh, geez, I really shouldn't have done that. da, 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 da. So that masculine, feminine thing still stands. It's just different in terms of what they're allowed to show versus what women are allowed to show. Yeah.
Cool.
So I think
that covers the first 2 points, right? So the first two topics are understanding your clients' relationships with food. The second point was chase your clients' goals and not yours. So we really touched base on those. I just wanted you to just elaborate on chronic stress and how chronic stress can cause physiological changes in the body.
So this one was really interesting because we kind of had it pop up on the Facebook group, which was interesting. And I was waiting to see the different approaches people came out with. So years ago, I was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue. When I was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, I decided I was going to research the hell out of adrenal fatigue, as you do when you're a scientist and you're in this industry. And I started to realize that regardless of what you want to call it, whether you want to call it adrenal insufficiency or whether you want to say that it's caused by environmental factors, however you want to approach it, the physiological response is the same either way. So your cortisol goes out of whack, whether or not you get raised cortisol levels or fluctuating cortisol levels, or whether or not your cortisol production is so high for so long that it bombs out, it doesn't matter. The physiological response is real and it initiates physical responses as well. So what I can tell you from my personal experience is when I went through the phases of adrenal fatigue, as they call them, I hit all of these points. So I went from physically not being able to stay awake. So I would be going through my day completely fine, and then all of a sudden I'd want to fall asleep right where I was standing, and I had no control over it whatsoever. Later down the track, I was able to find out that it was essentially me having a cortisol response that was followed by an adrenaline response. And if anyone's ever had an adrenaline spike before, if you've ever shown up at the site of an accident and felt your heart race and felt your blood pump and so on and so forth, this is what people feel every day when they've got these adrenal fluctuations. And from that, I was able to sort of piece it back to the decisions that I was making. At the time, I was running my own business, but I was still managing a health food store in the city because I was starting out my business and I wanted to do everything right. And essentially what this taught me was the environmental factors that we all talk about and we all think are controllable aren't always controllable, or at least we don't always learn to control them until we have a physiological response. So why would we intervene before we have a problem? It's that whole thing of, yes, I'm stressed, yes, I'm getting things done, but I'm still falling asleep, waking up, I'm still dropping body fat, gaining muscle mass, da 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 da. Why would I do anything about it? The reason that
it probably just goes back to like reactive and proactive, right? Like, unless something's broken, don't fix it. So like,
exactly right.
It's almost like, well, when something like this does break, it's a lot harder to fix it. It's not as easy as what people think.
That's it. And that's why it comes down to encouraging people to make the best choices before these things happen. But the problem is we don't learn about these things unless some people make mistakes. So I would have never understood how the adrenals work. I would never have understood how cortisol affects your adrenaline response, how cortisol affects your blood glucose and your blood pressure response, so on and so forth. And I wouldn't have been able to pass that information on to my clients. Now that we can understand the underlying hormonal relationships, we can say, all right, this plus this equals this, and this is the physical manifestation of it. When people feel validated, it's easier for them to make changes. So when I'm able to sit with somebody and say, look, in phase 2 of adrenal insufficiency, this is what usually happens, and they can sit there and say, oh my God, that's me. That's how I feel right now. They can connect, understand that their physiological and physical responses are real. It allows them to acknowledge that sometimes we feel like stress isn't allowed to be a reason anymore, don't we? We feel like you can't blame it on stress because everyone's stressed, da 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 da. But if your stress levels are so chronic and so high that it physically manifests in your body, it's something that needs to be addressed, and acknowledging that and allowing the client to recognize that that is actually happening in their body and that they're not manifesting it in their mind allows them to start to recover. So then,
sorry, I'm playing this one.
You're right.
That's right. So we'll quickly go on to the next couple as well, just because we have to get through all. But the information is great. And I think that it's, again, I think like coming back to education, right? Like it's understanding it on a physiological, in a physiological term, but educating the client in front of you so that they understand what's happening, why it's happening, so they can connect with it.
Exactly right.
So the prevalence of estrogen dominance in both men and women is increasing. This is a really interesting one. I'm interested to say.
So this is something that's been intriguing me over the last year. So I've been practicing for 13 years, right? And probably in the last 18 months, I've seen the prevalence of men in particular presenting with estrogen dominance go through the roof. So I'm, you know this, but the rest of the crew won't. I'm big on testing. Whenever my clients come in and there's something that doesn't quite add up, I'll send them off for hormone testing. I want to see what's going on in their system first so that we can develop a plan that will, you know, attack the cause, not just the symptoms. We don't want to just resolve the symptoms. We can put a Band-Aid over anything. So I've been sending all of these people off for testing, and what keeps coming back is estrogen dominance, estrogen dominance, estrogen dominance.
Why do you think that is?
I think what's causing it is what's happened over the last 10 years, not what's happening now. And I think it's an psychological response. There's definitely a psychological response component to it, but I also think if we have a look at what we're exposed to these days compared to what we were exposed to 20 or 30 years ago, we're exposed to a lot of new types of processed foods. Environmentally, we're exposed to a lot of xenoestrogens that we're not even aware of. Things like deodorants and all that sort of jazz, you know, these things accumulate in our system. One of the ones that I tell my clients about a lot of the time for the shock value is tuna tins. Tuna tins almost all have xenoestrogens in the inside layer of them, but we don't avoid them because tuna is so good for us, da 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 da. So the cumulative effect of all of these processed foods and things like that is resulting in a lot of men having this block. Basically, the aromatase action is upregulating, and we're not able to stop it. So when men have estrogen dominance, they usually won't notice it until they've had it for months and months and months, possibly even years. So by the time we actually diagnose them with it, it's, you know, 6 months just to get them back into the normal range.
Well, so we had a you know, me and you dealt with one of my clients in regards to progesterone. And, you know, like just getting him to understand that we're not even looking for progression right now. We're looking to get you back to optimal.
Exactly.
Over a 6-month period is such a hard thing to do.
Because you can't defeat your hormones. So a lot of things, you know, willpower and pushing through. You can't defeat your hormones. Your hormones are essentially controlling your body. So if you don't correct the imbalances first, there's no way that you can step forward. So from a male perspective, I think environment is a massive thing. I think it's a really big factor, and that's contributing largely to estrogen dominance, whether it's packaged foods, plastics, da 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 da, or environmental impacts. A lot of men work in environments where they're surrounded by plastics all the time. Painters, labourers, so on and so forth. They're exposed to these things that they aren't even aware that they're exposed to.
Sure.
And it's a cumulative thing. Whereas with women, I think it's triggered more by lack of testosterone in a lot of cases. So I think women have got, I think women go one of two ways with their decisions, with their fitness and their health. They either focus on their health first and allow that to develop their aesthetic benefits, or they focus on the aesthetic benefits first, starve their bodies, try and control their bodies, and in turn, their bodies start to have issues with testosterone production and estrogen production. When that starts happening, whether it's extreme dieting followed by binging, or whether it's amenorrhea and things like that, as soon as you throw your cascade out, your hormone cascade out, less of one hormone gets produced and more of one gets produced. It's like a fountain. You pour the water on, the water's going to come down. If you block one side, it's just going to come down the other side instead. So you're still manufacturing, but if you're not manufacturing enough of one, you're going to produce more of the other. And if your body's not effective at clearing it, which a lot of these clients of mine aren't very effective at clearing it, that doubles the problem. So if your liver function isn't there and you're not clearing that excess estrogen at a reasonable rate, it becomes a long-term effect.
For sure. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, we'll jump onto this next one. I could sit here and talk to you about this stuff all day, but we're under time constraints. So we'll save that for the seminar in a couple months.
Yeah,
cool.
For sure.
You can manage PCOS, so polycystic ovary syndrome,